In today's episode, an experienced outdoors couple on a camping adventure in the Alaskan wilderness has a rare encounter with a predatory grizzly bear. As they lay inside their tents, the bear slices through it and begins its ruthless assault. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the terrifying grizzly bear attack on Richard and Kathy Huffman. Welcome to Final Affliction. The Hula Hula River runs through Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. It is a popular whitewater rafting route, and some claim it offers an unparalleled experience. The river weaves between the foothills of the mountains, carves its way across open plains, and emerges out into the Beaufort Sea. Along the way, visitors can expect to see a huge variety of bird life, as well as large mammals such as wolves, caribou, and grizzly bears. Venturing out into such wilderness doesn't come without its dangers, but when the necessary precautions are taken, that risk is minimized. At least that's what Richard and Kathy Huffman thought when they packed for a recreational rafting trip in June 2005. Richard was a 61-year-old lawyer working for electric and telephone utilities in Anchorage. He was a partner in his law firm, Temple, Huffman and Ellis. He had received his bachelor's degree at the University of Kansas and had served as captain in the U.S. Army Judge Advocate General Corps. When he had time away from work, he was always off on long camping trips, enjoying the outdoors and the freedom away from the office. Catherine, known as Kathy to her friends, had taught in the Anchorage School District for many years. Her love for nature and the outdoors came across in the way she taught her elementary school classes. She would always have the children outside learning whenever she could, surrounded by the sounds of nature and appreciating all things big and small. She had more recently taught at Birchwood and Lake Otis elementary schools until she retired in 2002. Richard and Kathy married in 1989 and shared their love for the outdoors together. They were incredibly safety conscious, especially when it came to wildlife and the threat of grizzly or even polar bears in Alaska. If they were rafting and camping, then they often stopped off at one location to eat their dinner before jumping back into their boat and floating downstream to another place where they would set up their camp. They knew the risks of leaving food or the smell of cooking at a campsite, and they wanted to avoid those risks. Richard and Kathy set off down the Hula Hula River in June 2005. Their expedition would take 2 weeks to complete. It was the perfect trip, a mixture of wildlife and scenery, as well as adventure and exploration. They paddled down the river in their inflatable kayak. All their gear was secured inside the boat, and at the end of each day they turned into the bank and hauled the kayak up onto dry land. They set up their campsite, listening to the rushing water as they lay in their tent each night and drifted off to sleep. Towards the end of their trip, they finished eating their evening meal before packing up. They then drifted downstream a little further and found the perfect place to set up their camp. They erected their tent in the heart of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge along the coastal plain. At over 19 million acres in size, the refuge is the largest national wildlife refuge in the country, slightly bigger than the Yukon. It is being heavily debated and fought over for its rich oil reserves and its abundant wildlife. Since 1977, controversy has surrounded the debate, with governments eager to cash in on the oil and wildlife conservationists and natives desperate to preserve the natural beauty of the region. Any food Richard and Kathy had was secured in bear-proof containers and set a long distance away from their tent. But it wouldn't make any differences that night. Their fate had been sealed. The refuge is one of the few places in the world where black, brown, and polar bears live together. But that night it was a healthy 5 to 7-year-old male grizzly that was on the prowl. It wasn't starving, and it wasn't in bad condition, but it was on the hunt. It raised its nose in the air, smelled the Huffmans from a mile away, and walked towards their riverside camp. Richard and Kathy were tucked up in their sleeping bags, warm and cozy inside their tent. They only had a couple of days left of their adventure, and then it would be back to the real world. They relished every minute they had in the great outdoors together. It had been a successful trip, and they were lucky they could share it with each other. As their eyelids grew heavy and they drifted off to sleep, the grizzly bear made its approach. It walked boldly forwards, its head swaying slightly as it sniffed the ground. It could see the tent and smell the two people inside. They were easy prey, an easy meal. Its large, muscular shoulders were covered by thick brown fur. Its eyes glistened in the moonlight. Its huge paws trod silently over the rocky shoreline. Any scuffs from its footsteps on the loose rocks were muted by the rushing river. Only when the bear was centimeters from the outside of the canvas did Kathy awake and nudge Richard. The two of them could hear the sniffing of the bear right outside. Their hearts thundered in their chests as they held their breath, not daring to move or make a noise. Inside their heads they prayed the bear would leave them alone, that it would lose interest and turn the other way. It was not to be. Suddenly, the bear slashed through the side of the tent and launched its attack. It leapt on top of them, pinning them down as it brutally mauled them and swiped with its powerful paws. The hits were like a steam train knocking the air from their lungs. The stale stench of the bear's breath filled the tent as it grunted and growled just inches from their faces. The couple tried to curl up into a tight ball, protecting themselves from the attack. They braced themselves for each hit, but the attack went on and on, cracking their ribs and smacking their backs. The bear didn't let up. Richard and Kathy were trapped inside their sleeping bags and couldn't escape under the immense beast as terror rained down upon them. It happened so quickly that neither Richard nor Kathy had time to use their bear spray or pull out their firearm. It was a savage and rapid attack. The 300-pound bear sliced at the couple in their sleeping bags, cutting through skin and muscle without giving them the chance to fight back. Their screams and shouts went unanswered in the still of the night, their cries for help swallowed by the rushing sound of the Hula Hula River. The following morning, another rafter made his way down the river. He too was nearing the end of a long and successful trip from the Romanzoff Mountains towards the Beaufort Sea. When he rounded a large, sweeping corner in the river, he spotted the remnants of a camp on the shoreline. He could see the remains of a tent, torn and battered, some equipment strewn far and wide, and an inflatable kayak pulled up out of the water. This didn't look like good news. He pulled his boat to the side of the river and climbed out, scanning the surrounds for any signs of wildlife. He cautiously walked towards the tent. He couldn't see anybody there, but as he neared the tattered tent, something brown came crashing out of the undergrowth. It was the grizzly bear. Its ears were pinned back. Its stocky body was powerful as it thundered towards the man. He instantly turned and jumped back into his raft and paddled furiously away. Glancing back over his shoulder, he saw the bear slowing down and coming to a halt as it watched him paddle into the distance. He made his way downstream, determined to find help. The small city of Kaktovik was 12 miles away on Barter Island. After what seemed like an eternity, he arrived on the island and was able to notify the authorities. A helicopter was immediately dispatched to the location from Barrow. As North Slope Borough search and rescue circled the scene in the chopper, the grizzly bear came rushing out of the undergrowth once more. It was defending its cache and still posed a significant risk to rescuers. It was shot, and authorities were able to investigate properly. They tragically found Richard and Kathy still in their sleeping bags, lying still and bloodied. They had succumbed to their devastating injuries, but the bear had not fed on them. They suffered from multiple cuts and slashes from the bear's claws, which were not survivable. The bear's body was sent to Fairbanks for a necropsy. It was found to be a healthy, well-nourished bear that was in peak physical condition. When Fish and Game wildlife biologist Kathy Harms investigated the scene of the attack, she identified it as a clear-cut predatory attack. The state of the camp was a model of how to do it right, with everything that could be considered an attractant to a bear stowed away securely and at a significant distance from the camp. The couple had not made camp on a known bear route and had obviously eaten their food at another location rather than outside their tent, but still their efforts were no use. Every other year, a person is killed by a bear, usually a grizzly, but this is normally when they are defending young or a food source. 2/3 of bear attacks are on hunters who surprise the bear in the remote wilderness. On average, 6 people a year are injured by bears in Alaska. A predatory attack is incredibly rare, and it is one that is difficult to avoid. Even if all the protocols are followed to a T, it's very difficult to stop a predatory attack. Richard and Kathy had been incredibly unlucky on that fateful night, a rare encounter with a predatory grizzly bear who tragically brought them to their terrifying final affliction.